All right, welcome to another episode of Peanuts from the Plebs. And first of all, I have
We have an amazing show for you today.
well, we do, but I have a
Okay,
confession to
Sagar,
make
relax.
first. In the true Stalinist tradition, I have a confession to make that I was wrong. Daisy, you were right. Plebeians in Rome, in ancient Rome, were not slaves; they were the commoners. So, not that there is that big a difference, because
I'll take it.
there's a subtle distinction there, and I think it applies to the.
But they were still unempowered in their form of government.
That's correct. I mean, if they didn't own
obviously
property,
slaves
they
was a whole
couldn't
different
vote.
level.
If they weren't of a certain gender, they couldn't vote. So there were a lot of limitations on their on whatever power that they had. But anyways, going past that, well, what do you think about this whole thing just happened with the Southern District of New York, where the attorney for the Southern District, Berman, is refusing to resign because he said after Attorney General Barr announced that Berman was resigning, Berman said, I never said I was going to resign, and I'm not going to resign. And they want to replace him with this guy, is the current head of the SEC, who's never been a prosecutor before. I mean, he's a lawyer, but he's never been a prosecutor. And I think it's interesting that the Southern District of New York is doing they're doing the investigations, into Trump's corruption, as well as Epstein, all these things. They did the investigation into Michael Cohen. So there's a lot of interests, there are a lot of conflict of interest potentially between, of this action of trying to remove Berman from power. And I know we tend to bash Democrats a lot, but I think this is a case where where Barr, kind of reminiscent of John Mitchell from the Nixon years. I mean, it's kind of just like the sidekick for Trump, who does the dirty work, and he's trying to get rid of this attorney the Southern District of New York, which is so powerful, as a threat to the administration. And I just wonder if you had any thoughts about that. And one other thing I want to mention too is this guy. He's with the law firm of Sullivan and Cromwell in New York, which is this old law firm, which is notorious.
I have Jay Clayton.
Yeah, Jay Clayton, right?
I was just waiting for a moment to interject that.
So Jay Clayton, who is the head of the SEC that Trump wants to replace Berman in the Southern District of New York with, Clayton is a lawyer it was a lawyer for Sullivan and Cromwell, which is the same law firm that produced the Dulles brothers and had various Nazi clients during the 30s, or Nazi-associated corporations such as IG Farben, represented United Fruit Company, and also lobbied for coups such as the one in Guatemala in 1954. So they have a long history of connection with U.S. foreign policy, and a very anti-communist, anti-socialist tradition. So I just thought that was interesting, just coming from that background. I don't think there's any connection between Clayton and that legacy necessarily.
So from my point of view, from the 1,000-foot level, Trump is extremely corrupt, and he'll do all these kind of behind-the-scenes kind of power plays that anyone would do. The reason that the establishment hates him, right? Because you see evidence now of like all the Dems getting together and loving Bolton, even though he's a horrible warmonger.
Right.
The thing he said was the worst about the Trump administration was that he didn't go to war basically with Iran, right? I mean, the guy's nuts, horrible warmonger, and all these Dems are like worshiping his feet for this book and they all hate together. They hate Trump because Trump puts a true ugly face on the oligarchy and on warmongering.
Right.
And they like, the clean, slick, goofy W or well-spoken Obama doing their warmongering for them, basically.
They like to work in the shadows.
Yeah. Yeah, and Trump puts a laser focus on everything he's doing. That's for sure, right? Yeah,
Mhm.
I mean, it's interesting how Trump represents this phenomenon of populism, right? I mean, people are realizing that the government doesn't work for them, that there, there's a swamp, it's corrupt, influence of money, and then they get this guy. I mean, basically, he's a game show host, as Jimmy Dore likes to say, or
yeah,
a carnival barker. I mean, basically, he's a con man, but he definitely addressed concerns that people had, and that's why he was elected. So, I mean, even though he's corrupt and just well, I shouldn't use the word deplorable, but I mean, as a human specimen, he's really not somebody you want to hold up as a role model for your children, right? But um, that what he represents, though, the phenomenon of opposition to that corruption, to the foreign policy, all these things, that's genuine. So I think, yeah, you're right, Jim. They will
yeah.
the enemy of the enemy of our enemy is our friend. So anybody, whether it's Mueller or John Bolton or whoever the latest one is, if they're, it doesn't matter how you know right wing they are or whatever, if they are criticizing Trump, then he's our friend for now.
Oh, exactly. Yeah,
Yeah, that's all that matters, right? Is that it's big bad Trump, which is an argument for why voting for Biden or voting for Trump, or obviously voting for a third party, but essentially that's seen as a vote for Trump, right? That if he wins another election, then who knows how he's going to be? Because right now he is at least a little bit subdued and he's
Right.
constrained because he's trying to get reelected. And you can see that in the actions that he takes, right? He supposedly, before this whole thing happened with the coronavirus, it was, he was in the lead, he was set to win. But then what happened? His dealing with the coronavirus, and even then, as his numbers were dropping, I think what really has like kind of sandbagged him now was his response to the protests. That authoritarianism that came
yeah,
out, that really
Right.
scared a lot of people that were carrying water for him before, and now they're doubting that because they're thinking, well, he kind of exposed the way that he would be in the second term when he's no longer worried about getting those electoral votes anymore, and he's just running rampant or doing the bidding of the corporations, continuing with the fascism.
right.
I mean, who really knows, right?
I was just listening to Crystal and Sager that was basically along the point saying that basically older white folks were, probably more on Trump's side, but this coronavirus thing has really scared them. And Biden is out there. Well, he's not out there. He's still in the bunker making ads and stuff. But, he's basically saying, well, I would handle this better. And, da, da, da. And basically they're looking for anything, I think, at this point, And they might also play up the fact that if they keep the coronavirus scare going, they might also, keep those voters from coming out at all.
Do you think there's any scenario at this point where Trump could win? Because even in like Iowa, that was considered a slam dunk for Trump. He's behind by like 10 points in the polls, and of course, we still have 4 or 5 months until the election. But can you envision any way that Biden would do something really bad, or something would happen that Trump could still pull it off?
See,
Well,
that's the thing. Like everybody keeps talking about how, oh, now Trump is winning or Biden's winning. I think with the way that the
no
news
idea.
cycle goes, and and people's memories, everybody forgets. Like everybody keeps thinking about,
Yes.
oh, in November people are going to remember how he reacted to the coronavirus or his leader. They're not going to remember. They're going to remember whatever happened maybe a couple of weeks before the election, and
Right.
that's what's really going to drive it. Honestly, I think it's just way too soon to call it at this point.
I mean, that
Yeah,
happened.
I think there's no way what's gonna. I agree. There's no way what's gonna happen between now and then.
I mean, whether it's just something that just happens or whether it's something that's orchestrated. Because you think about 2016, there was all the stuff with Comey and the emails and everything came out at the last minute. Um, and I mean, that definitely had an influence. I mean, not that it would have been different, but I think it hurt hurt the Democrats at the last
Well,
minute.
it definitely hurt Hillary in the sense that that's where the whole crooked Hillary thing really cemented for her, right?
Right.
But it also showed the two-tiered justice system that we have, right? The fact that she was able to get away with all these things. Why? Just because she's this rich white lady, this rich white elite person who,
Right.
oh, because she didn't mean to, well then that doesn't
Yeah.
matter. So technically, if I commit some sort of crime and I didn't mean to, well, oh,
Right.
my bad. But I
So
still committed the crime.
if Biden
Who
pulls
cares?
out the, I mean, if Trump pulls out the Hunter Biden card at the last minute and says, look at all this corruption, it's going to be totally corrupt. I mean, it's kind of like the pot calling the kettle black, right? I mean, I don't see how.
Oh yeah, it's two of the worst candidates we've ever had, ever, and they're both horrifically corrupt. And
Which is disgusting because that's what they said in 2016.
I give Trump at least as much chance of winning as I give Biden of not being the nominee. I think there's a huge chance he's not even the nominee at the end. If you've seen anything he's done recently, he can't even talk. And
Yeah,
there's barely anything out there now with him at all.
Did you see his campaign ad, the recent one that's online? Like he has a, I mean, he's had, I know he's had a speech impediment, but it really comes out in this campaign ad, and they have the words printed below so you can read that, but it doesn't correspond exactly to what he says because he kind of does a lot of. Go ahead.
Anything with more than a couple simple syllables, he fumbles a little bit, and it's it really is almost like somebody that's had a minor stroke, struggling to talk. It's not I know speech impediment. They said he had not a lisp, but what did he have?
A stutter.
Stutter. It's not a stutter.
I thought he had a stutter when he was younger.
Well, what I'm seeing recently isn't a stutter, and it just looks so much to me like somebody that's got early onset dementia,
Right.
Yeah.
So I thought we could talk about Tulsi and the peace nomination.
So this is fantastic. Okay. Now, how many Americans know there is such a thing as an American Peace Prize?
I know, seriously. But yeah, so Tulsi is nominated for the 2020 U.S. Peace Prize. She is if she would win, she would be amongst a pretty cool crowd.
Dennis.
First one to win was Cindy Sheehan back in 2009.
Yeah, right.
Dennis Kucinich, Noam Chomsky, Medea Benjamin, Chelsea Manning, organizations like Code Pink, Veterans for Peace, and the last year's winner who was Ajamu Baraka.
Fantastic.
And then
good company.
She's also, she's up against some pretty heavy contenders with Daniel Ellsberg, who is known for his releasing of the Pentagon Papers. Steve, do you want to talk a little bit about the Pentagon Papers, the importance of that?
Well, I mean, he became famous in the 70s for releasing with Mike Revelle, who was a senator from Alaska.
Well, he read it into
the congressional record.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So this was basically the secret plans of the Pentagon for Vietnam that were totally at odds with what they were publicly saying. Sound familiar? I don't know. It seems like history repeats itself.
Mm-hmm.
And Ellsberg also is currently, very outspoken about U.S. foreign policy, and I think this award is probably in recognition of his past history, but even more in recognition of what he's been doing recently in terms of criticizing the whole war machine. I mean, both parties.
Yeah.
Curious, nobody read the Afghanistan papers that showed they've been lying to us for 8 years?
Right.
And no one read those into the congressional record, right?
Tulsi still has time, right?
Yeah, come on, Tulsi.
Okay. So
I think it's great that that Tulsi is being nominated for this, because I think
she's being recognized, right?
She's being recognized, because it seems like one day we hear she's a Russian asset, then we hear she's whatever, a Hindu nationalist. We just hear all these different things, and then it's nice to hear something positive about somebody. Obviously, we all worked in the Tulsi campaign, so we believed in that platform, even if we didn't agree with her 100% on every issue. But just her main issue was the fighting against the war machine, which was sucking up so much of our taxpayer dollars and resources, as well as
and,
just
and
bad,
she was
bad. Go ahead.
and she was purely brave the way she called these things out constantly. She called out the military industrial complex. She called out the deep state, quote, permanent state, for pushing Russiagate and getting us into a dangerous Cold War. She said, like, if she was the president, the first thing she would do is go meet with the nuclear powers, right? We just have this conflict with China and India, right, which raises the specter of global annihilation. And she was saying she would go and talk to all these countries and try and work towards peace and disarmament. So it's fantastic she gets this recognition.
Right. I think the most important thing that is being highlighted from this nomination is her work in diplomacy. I think that and the fact that that garnered so much support for her, the fact that she was so emphatic about creating this level of diplomacy globally, that was so important to her. I think that it could set a precedent for future nominees, presidential nominees, or, just for people working in our Congress, it's just to know that it is something that is highly supported by the American populace. People want peace and diplomacy. And I think that, she is an exemplar of this. So I'm really excited about that.
Yeah, even to the point of disagreeing with the other candidates on stage, right, in the debate stage, where they're like mocking her for saying she would go meet with anyone to pursue peace, and also her being supportive of Trump meeting with North Korea. Basically, anything to pursue peace, anything to keep the American people safer. It's fantastic.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So another person that I thought that is really incredible and his work needs to be highlighted is Major Danny Surgson, which I'm sure if you look at it, if you see his picture, you recognize him. He's been on Jimmy Dore. He's been on the 0 Hour. The Democracy Now. He's been on a bunch of places, but right now he writes for antiwar.com, and essentially he is. So he writes here for professional purposes. He gives the whole spiel of let's see, where is it? Okay, so he's a retired U.S. Army officer and a contributing editor to antiwar.com. And I love antiwar.com. I think it's amazing. But in his latest piece, it's called Alone and Unafraid, Welcome to Chicken Hawk America, which I thought it was really funny because I feel like Tulsi, remember when she called Trump's cabinet chicken hawks?
Yes.
When she called them out on Twitter. I thought that was really cool. But in this piece, it's definitely worth a read, and I will put the link below.
Nice.
So you can check it out. But in the piece, he talks about the first part. He talks about how much shit essentially he gets constantly, about how he's also called a Russian asset and all of this shit, the same way that Tulsi was called. But he highlights the fact that there is a lot of soldier dissent. Which is, to me, it's really important because those are the people that we send overseas to go and kill and ruin the lives of all these people overseas, right? And we don't think about the effects that this has on the veterans, right? On the effects that it has on their families, which that was a big thing that Tulsi was always talking about, is the fact that they're the ones who have to pay the price, right? The ultimate price has to be paid by these soldiers. So this was essentially a response to the orders by Trump to essentially activate the National Guard, how he threatened that if the governors didn't activate them, that he would activate the National Guard. And on About Face, which I guess is like this platform for veterans, they actually have an open letter, which I thought was really cool. It's this open letter from veterans to recently activated National Guard troops. And it's essentially a call for them to refuse orders to activate. And what I thought was really amazing, the line from this that that I really liked was, "We know that it is your intention to be of service and prevent more harm, but we urge you to remember the deadly legacy of the National Guard enacting violence against protesters. Watts in 1965, Kent State in 1970, Los Angeles in 1992, and many other examples in recent history. The
Mhm.
military is designed to be lethal, not to de-escalate," which I thought that was so pertinent for them to say that, because that is the truth. That is the
Yeah.
problem, that our military, they have their scope is different. When they go in somewhere, it's to, you know, extract whatever it is that they need to extract, or control whatever situation by any means necessary. And it is just for their safety. That's all they're worried about, because they're not serving these people, right? They're literally just there to follow orders, do their duty, and then that's it.
And it's
And I think
interesting in the context of our discussion of police militarization of the police from last week, that you know that the police have moved in that direction. I don't think the police would agree they're designed to be lethal, but definitely they've become more militarized and have moved in that direction, right?
yep, yep.
Interesting.
And I think that it's really important to keep the conversation of peace and diplomacy, and you know, obviously not activating you know, these National Guard on our streets, because, you know, we're being distracted by all of these other stories that are going on right now, you know, whether it be because of the pandemic, or because of, you know, the riots, and these are all distractions, right? That to keep you from looking at what's actually going on. There's actually a lot that is going on, that's continuing to go on foreign policy wise, and no one is actually talking about it because of the fact that we're so distracted by all these other things. But in the sense, it's just like how they, you know, they continue to inflict poverty on people, right? Because if you're poor, you're too busy, you're too distracted worrying about where your next meal is going to come from, to worry about, you know, people being bombed overseas, or even anything that goes on here, you know, like when all the protesters were being attacked, you know, at Standing Rock, a lot of people, they just didn't have the time for it. Why? Because they have all this other shit going on, that they don't have the bandwidth to be able to deal with this, right? And that is on purpose. That is, to me, poverty is violence committed by the state.
Yeah, and also at the same time, just to add to what you're saying, you know, very few people, you know, relatively speaking, are looking at antiwar.com, and very few people are looking at Jimmy Dore. And you know, if you look at MSNBC or CNN, you know, they might filter a lot of this stuff out because they're essentially, you know, state propaganda.
Right. And then the other thing that I really liked from his piece was the fact that he talks about elite fear, and he talks about how the media uses these retired generals and all this to essentially manufacture consent from the audience, you know, to be able to commit whatever sort of atrocities it is that they want to commit, or, you know, to infringe on our freedoms, right? And under the guise of doing it for our own good.
I'm sorry, you're talking about like these kind of stateside actions, or are you talking about you know, foreign wars?
Well, so like if you look at the engagements overseas, you see how they bring out these generals in order to manufacture consent. So thinking that, oh well, we're trying to help these people, right? We're bringing them democracy. That's always,
of course,
you know, like essentially what he writes about in his piece is that the media uses this trust that the American people have in our veterans, and they parade them out so that they can say, oh look, see, if our veterans agree with this, then it must be okay for us to do this.
Well, it's
yeah.
not just like the media using them, but it's like the national security state using the media to use these people, you know, so they're getting
Well,
advertising
Project
dollars.
Mockingbird, right? That's what that whole
Yeah,
thing
but
was.
I mean, and the classic case is the build up to the Iraq War in 2003. You had all these generals going on talking about, you know, Saddam's imminent threat to the United States because of weapons of mass destruction, and how he was supporting Al Qaeda, which all turned out to be absolute lies. But you know, that was a very orchestrated attempt to manufacture consent.
Sure, you have to look for several things they do. First, they work on fear, right? They bring out cartoons of mobile chemical weapon labs that never existed. They never had any actual, but they drew a cartoon of it and people said, oh, that's what it is, Colin Powell waving around some yellow cake uranium, right? So all these things. Then the other thing is
or the threat level. You remember after 9/11, it was constantly the red alert. The threat level.
And the other thing is to dehumanize those that you want to go after. So you talk about them going into neonatal care and throwing babies out of incubators, and raping and all this stuff. And so they have all these avenues to lie to us to basically to sell weapons so they can get into war to use up weapons and
right.
And
it wasn't that case.
Whatever,
the case with the pulling the babies out of incubators was from the Iraq invasion of Kuwait in 1990, and they had congressional testimony of this woman who said that she was firsthand witness to this as Saddam's troops went in there and they just massacred babies. And turns out the woman was a daughter of the Kuwaiti ambassador or something like right.
Sure,
so, and which she didn't divulge.
Just that woman that Jimmy Dore and everybody loved to laugh about that was reporting for CNN that was sniffing the backpack that supposedly had sarin gas on it or something like that, and she was the daughter of the person that had been displaced as leader there or something like that. It's just it's like you've got to be kidding me, But that's how much lack of respect they have for their audience at this point.
I mean, it seems like it started
and the state media.
I remember it started in the 80s with Reagan when we had the invasion of Grenada, which was to rescue medical students. And this was in whenever it was the mid 80s. And it was a joke because Grenada, what do they have in terms of defenses, and the US, the most powerful military in the world attacking this little, country in the Caribbean. It was, but I remember there was all this build up to it, how we're, it's we're proud of our troops again. And it was to get rid of this, to throw off this whole, shadow of Vietnam legacy that we were ashamed, or whatever. We could be proud of our troops again. We could put a little ribbon on our car, to show our support for the troops. And I remember in 1990 I support our troops in the Gulf. That was a popular bumper sticker everywhere. And it was definitely manufactured consent, but it was trying to throw off that yoke of shame from Vietnam, that we're proud again. We're proud to exercise our power. And so Grenada was almost like a joke because, Grenada is no threat to the U.S., right? But it was kind of a practice run for what was to come. And then it was, Bush. Remember Bush getting a standing ovation for both parties in Congress after he had, pushed Iraq back into Kuwait. Even though it's pretty clear that Bush gave Saddam the okay to go into Kuwait before that, but it's just and younger people don't remember. They don't remember the Vietnam. But I think that whole thing started with Reagan. Be proud of America again. Be proud of our troops, and it's okay for us to exercise our military power around the world.
Yeah. I could also see Grenada. That makes a good sense of Grenada. I could also just imagine them just saying, well, we've got these new weapons we need to try in a realistic scenario. And they're like, who's out there? We could drum up an excuse to go.
It's one step above a military. It's like a military exercise. It's like it's a real country, but is it? It's a real country,
right?
Well, but that is the American exceptionalism, right? That we can do whatever it is that we want, but we hold other countries to different standards. And ultimately, that's why not holding any of these people accountable, that is why that is so dangerous. And that's why I always go back to that anytime that they want to talk about any sort of crimes that other countries are committing. I want to see the moment that we start to hold these people in power, when we start to hold them to account, and they have to pay the price for the lies that they have spread in order to continue to murder and pillage across the world, then I don't want to hear it.
Okay. So I want to work in my Moscow minute right now.
Okay.
Do it.
So in terms of the question is, why is Russia's always being brought up as a threat? Russia, it's a huge country. It's the largest country in the world. And it had a lot of natural resources, but economically, it's about on par with maybe South Korea. It's really not that, it doesn't have a strong export, except for natural gas and oil. It doesn't really have a strong manufacturing base, whatever. But we hear, recently we heard from Susan Rice that Russia maybe is behind these protests, the BLM protests, right? And we heard during Tulsi's campaign that Tulsi is a Russian asset. Why is Russia such a threat to the, to these, from the perspective of these politicians, or from, to the national security state? Why is Russia being singled out as being such a threat when obviously they aren't all that powerful?
So is it precisely because economically and militaristically they're such a so minor compared to us? Is it basically that we can use them as the boogeyman without necessarily suffering, real consequences? That's one possibility, right?
That's one possibility. I mean,
that's what I think, is that you have the example of the DNC using Russia and the whole this hoax of the hacking that happened. They use that in order to be able to not have to make any changes and just obfuscate, just be able to say, oh, look over there, and look, and they're the ones who did all these things, to put our election integrity at risk, when in actuality you have gerrymandering, you have all of these different factors that are domestic issues that have nothing to do with Russia. That's actually what affected these elections. But if we don't have a big bag boogeyman to look at, well, then we actually have to look at our own faults, and we can't deal with that.
So I would venture to say that Russia actually is a threat to these people, but not for the reasons that they're offering. I think the ultimate goal of the neoliberal, neoconservative agenda is this kind of Pax Americana, where you're going to have neoliberal capitalism around the world under basically American domination. You're going to have Walmart in every major city. I mean, you already have Walmart as far as I know, you have it in Russia and everything already, in China definitely. But the question is, Putin in Russia and Xi in China, they are part of that non-aligned kind of counterweight to U.S. supremacy. And I'm sure you've heard the phrase, the BRICS nations, the BRICS nations. It's Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. The idea,
I did not know that.
Well, if you look it up, and there's I mean, in back, going back in history to like the 60s, you had the non-aligned nations under Suharto in Indonesia, and you had these kind of emerging third world countries that were huge countries population-wise in terms of resources, that had been exploited by this system of neocolonialism that were rising up against that. I mean, India included. And now these countries kind of see the U.S. as a threat. They see the U.S. as like, we don't want a Pax Americana. And part of it's for economic reasons, but part of it's also for like cultural reasons. They look at the U.S. and they see like, gee, I mean, this is not what we want for our country.
Right.
Nor is that tradition of American, way of life, something that we want for our people. It doesn't conform, doesn't mix with our tradition. So I think the real ultimate goal is we want to roll over Russia, and we don't like powerful populist leaders like Putin who are going to get in the way of that. No matter what you think of Putin as a leader.
What changed since it was the Obama administration policy of Russian reset and trying to? Is it like gas pipeline economics happening in Eastern Europe? Is that what happened, or is it that combined with the need for for a boogeyman.
I
And
think
and they tried running Tulsi as a Grenadian asset up the flagpole, and it didn't fly, so they had to go with Russian, right?
right, right. No, I don't know. I mean, I think they were always seeing Russia as ultimately a power to be dealt with. Whether it's, I mean, they basically see modern Russia as the heir of the Soviet period.
Mhm.
That Putin is basically, he's KGB. He grew up in the Soviet period, so he basically sees modern Russia as as Soviet Union light, and that the U.S. has to defeat that power. So whether the Russian reset at the beginning of the Obama administration, I mean, I can only guess what the ultimate motive uh, was. But I
That
would
was,
guess I don't think it was making peace with Russia and basically patrolling the Middle East together with Russian troops. I mean, I think it was basically getting access to air bases in the Russian sphere of influence so that we could do what we need to do in Afghanistan or whatever. And I think it was less about actually trying to achieve some long-term, uh, peace with Russia. That's just my opinion. Um,
Yeah, I think it has to do with the fact that Russia and China, they are not willing to just let the US run rampant and do whatever it wants and be the bully that it's been for, how long now,
right. Yeah.
Uh, and the US doesn't like that. Again, it comes back to American exceptionalism. It's imperialism, it's the
Mhm.
fact that you have Russia and China who not only have they tried to do their own pipelines, but it's also they're trying to get off the dollar. Why? Because of these sanctions, because
right.
they're seeing how this is self-inflicted. This is a self-inflicted issue that the United States has brought upon itself because it's just been too greedy, and because it wants to continue to be a hegemony, uh, and uh, and that is to our own detriment. That's going to be
Yeah.
our own fall.
Right. And Putin,
Essentially,
go ahead.
essentially abusing other countries is now like part of our economic policy, essentially, right? And it's like, so
Well,
yeah,
remember how Venezuela and Iran. Remember what they had to do. That they had to you had to have the Venezuelan ships kind of bring going along with the Iranian ships in order to secure and make sure that if the U.S. wanted to intercept any of the ships, that they would be able to help them out. Like that
yeah,
is when you're at that point where you have countries that are having to ally in order to kind of
right.
get around this other country. When they should be free to import oil and whatever sort of needs that they have, they should be able to import them without having to look over their shoulders and think, oh, what's the US going to think of this?
Yeah, but you look at
Right.
those countries. I mean, look at Iran. We orchestrated a coup there in 1953 that was under Allen Dulles. So basically, a democratically elected president who'd actually, visited Washington and the White House as a guest of Truman was overthrown and replaced with a Shah in 1953. And the 1979 revolution was a
Right.
reaction to that overthrow in
Right.
some respects. So like there's a long history of U.S. Exploitation of other countries for economic benefit. It hasn't just been recently. It's been going back to basically, to Teddy Roosevelt and that period of the Spanish-American War and United Fruit and banana republics. They actually are banana republics in Central America, and uh, that tradition of exploiting countries, and also John Perkins, who wrote Confessions of an Economic Hitman, a book about how he was an economic hitman. He was basically sent in, as maybe a corporate representative, but basically had CIA support, and the idea was to buy off the elites in these countries uh, so that they could get access to the raw materials and cheap manufactured goods, or get the raw materials at very low prices, so that the majority of the population would remain in poverty, but you'd have these rich elites. And that was a system that was set up, and he wrote this book about it. He said that was the only thing that kept them from going after me, was for me to go public with this book.
Uh-huh. Hmm.
But he's actually written several books, John Perkins.
Hmm.
Um, But that whole tradition of the U.S. of going in and that was the model. That's the model of neoliberalism, and it's all backed by the World Bank. And the U.S. gets to appoint the leader of the World Bank. So basically, it's a U.S. institution that does majority of the funding for that institution. So it's there's a long history of that, and I think Russia definitely sees the U.S. as a threat. China sees the U.S. as a threat because they're the U.S. based on their tradition, they would not think twice really about if they have the opportunity of overthrowing them and installing some kind of pro U.S. friendly government, right? I mean, if they can do it in Bolivia and they can do it and try to do it in Venezuela, then it's just a matter of degree to when they can try to do it in Russia and China. Right. I mean, go ahead.
Clinton essentially bragged about getting who is it that he essentially assisted in getting elected in Russia.
Oh, Yeltsin.
Oh, Yeltsin. Yeah.
Yeltsin, yeah, he essentially bragged about having fixed the elections essentially and worked behind the scenes to get Yeltsin elected. I mean, the reason Putin might be worried is because we've tried to do it before.
Remember with Ukraine, there was that the Russians actually intercepted that cell phone call between what's her name? She's the wife of Robert Kagan. I can't remember her name. But she was involved with the State Department, and she was saying, basically talking about who they would select as a presidential candidate for Ukraine. And they liked this guy. His nickname was Yats, Y-A-T-S. I can't remember his full Ukrainian name, but it revealed very clearly that the U.S. was working behind the scenes to get the people they wanted in charge of that country.
Mm-hmm.
So that's I think there's a long history of that, and that's why they're Russia and China are justifiably concerned about the threat from outside.
Yeah.
I could go on and on, but I'll stop.
So I wanted to tie in, sticking with the foreign policy, I wanted to talk about, all the things that are going out in the South Pacific. It seems like that's a hot spot right now for news and conflicts. But so it's tying into this whole conversation that we're already having of essentially China is having to fight on all these different fronts, right? So you have the issue that's going on in North Korea, where you have Kim Yo-young, which is Kim Jong-un's sister. She has kind of been named the successor, not officially, but essentially she's been named the successor, which is obviously a big deal, the fact that the leader of North Korea would be a woman. But, there is a lot of, I think it was mostly just because with the recent health scare that Kim Jong-un had, it did formulate a lot of instability as to what would happen, if he actually were not the leader anymore, because obviously we do have some sort of, just some issues.
Well, probably even just incapacitated for a length of time, right? You need to have some kind of.
Right, so that's why having him, naming his sister now as somebody, who he has said that she has certain powers or whatever. Who knows how that's going to go in the talks with South Korea, because supposedly North Korea is going to start up nuclear testing again. So we'll see on that end. But China is seen as a big player on this because what they're saying is that North Korea is feeling like that China will be on their side. So they may be more willing to be provocative. Do you know what I'm saying? And then you have the clashes that happened at the border over Kashmir with India, right?
I'm sorry. I'll back up just a little bit. So the sister of Kim Jong-un in North Korea, she made like a threat to South Korea or something. Is that what happened? She literally made a threat, I thought, essentially.
Well, the thing is that we don't really know. She's been working a lot behind the scenes,
Yeah.
This is actually now the first time that it reminded me, honestly, a lot of the Castros in Cuba, of, how Raul Castro is now in charge. and he came in charge after Fidel Castro a few years ago, before he died. That, you know, Fidel Castro was essentially incapacitated, but you know, a lot of people were wondering how it was going to change once Fidel Castro was no longer in charge and Raul Castro was in charge, if things were going to change. And essentially what they saw was that Raul Castro, it just continued on with the rule of Fidel Castro. Nothing
Yeah,
essentially
but I'm
changed.
just talking there that she did make a specific threat of military action against South Korea.
Yeah. So,
Yeah.
so that's the thing. It's like she could be a very much a warmonger, and
That's what I want to bring out is that this seems like a really dangerous situation, given that. Yeah.
I don't think China would support an aggressive foreign policy by North Korea. I mean, China seems to want to keep North Korea under, you know, under wraps to a certain extent, like just to kind of, because they, you know, if there's a blow up, you know, in the Korean Peninsula, it's going to affect China, you know, directly. So I think it's in their interest to kind of keep things, you know, quiet as much as possible there.
But then you have to wonder why it is that all of a sudden you're having these conflicts with India, because I mean, technically these countries have not been,
Right.
you know, at odds like this. The way that it just seems like China right now is having a lot of issues, right? Because this last clash that happened with India, it's like the bloodiest one in the last 45 years.
Can I say something about that clash? Because first of all, they don't have guns, right? So they're walking around and they're
stones
hitting each other with sticks and stones, which is like, you know, how much have we progressed in the last 2 million years? You know, since whenever.
Yeah, if we could actually legislate somehow, you know, get world agreement that all wars will be conducted in hand-to-hand combat,
right?
I think that would be a good thing.
I mean, it's just incredible. These two nuclear-powered countries that could blow each other up to smithereens are resorting to, you know, hand-to-hand, literal hand-to-hand combat, where you have a guy standing there trying to take pictures of it, and then, you know, that they're bludgeoning each other to death. I mean, to me, it's like, what's wrong with this picture, you know? And it seems like maybe there's some.
So are you saying that you would rather them be fighting with guns and?
No, I'm just saying, like, it just.
And their nuclear weapons, like pointing their nuclear weapons at each other?
It's like kids on the playground. I mean, they need to sit down and take a time out, you know. This is like.
But you see, that's why I was wondering. I think that the timing of all these things, it's not for nothing, right? And I think it's interesting the fact that you have these protests that have sprung up in Delhi, talking about that they want to ban Chinese products.
Right.
And so again, you see how it always comes down to the economy. It always comes down to some sort of trade or anything like that. And you got to remember how, I mean, at least from what I've seen, anytime that I see any sort of Indian commentator, they never have anything good to say about China. And I think that it has to do with the fact that India is coming up as a manufacturing power structure, right?
Right.
And obviously that is a threat to China, which is considering the manufacturing hub of the world right now, right? And I think that is where I think that is really the crux of this battle.
I think you're right. I think it's the economy is the crux of it, but I also think that the economy, you know, produces things like racism and nationalism, that those are related. So I think there's that element too. I mean, China is no angel. I mean, they want to assert their power on the world stage. So they are, you know, it is probably a coordinated effort between, you know, the Kashmir and the South China Sea and Korea, and that they're trying to, you know, and also with the whole, I mean, they are the manufacturing powerhouse of the planet, right? So I mean, they have a lot of power, and they're trying to exercise that power. So I think that's what it's. I mean, you know,
and then even if you want to tie it to the United States, so the way that I brought it back home, right, and I tie it to domestic policy, which is something that Tulsi always talked about, was that foreign policy is domestic policy, right? Is the fact that you have this trade war that we've been having with China for how long now,
right?
And these issues with Huawei, right? Which Huawei, like, right now it's in the news again because China just escalated charges on these two Canadians They put them out with spying
Spying.
charges, right?
Mhm.
Because essentially the U.S. wants to extradite one of these top executives from Huawei, which happens to be the daughter of the founder of Huawei. Okay, and they want to extradite her to the United States. So all of this stuff comes into play, and I think that, like, if you think about one of the main reasons why Elon Musk was pushing to open up the economy again, and that he is not for all these trade wars and stuff, is because why? Because of the fact that China is this manufacturing hub. That's where the majority of these companies get their pieces for their cars and all this. We can't function, unfortunately, without China. And I think that is that is what a lot of these people who are anti-China, that is their problem.
Right. Well, we're in
like.
a global economy. I mean, its sovereignty is becoming like an anachronism, because, like, it doesn't matter where you buy your parts for your car, right? You buy them from China or wherever, but we basically operate in a global economy. And I think the real conflict here is between the neoliberal model, which is looking for a unipolar world controlled by the out of Washington D.C., and this vision of a multipolar world, or really a global world that has multipolar, centers of manufacturing, centers of different, maybe, banking or different aspects. And I think, in a sense, you see, like, Putin talking about that. I don't know if Xi has talked about that, but talking about a multipolar world. And it seems like that's something that Tulsi would support, the idea that you can't have the U.S. trying to run everything. It's not in the interest of the rest of the world, and it's not in our interest to try to dominate the rest of the world's economy.
But I think that's a very important conversation to have, because think about it. If we are not I don't want us to be this hegemon, because I just want us to be in control of everything. But we do have certain perks that we see as a country, as its citizenry. We do have certain perks that come with being an American. So we have to be able to balance that, right? We have to be able to, obviously not, transact in a world where all we do is just, constantly go to battle with all these other countries. We have to allow them to be sovereign and to exist and all these things. But at the same time, I want to be able to have these benefits that come with having these trade deals, and, the fact that technically we can travel where we want to, and, just the fact that we're American citizens, we have like this.
Yeah, but for a lot of people, they don't have the benefit of that. I mean, the middle class has been eviscerated, and there's, like, a lot of people, they're just concerned about, how they're going to pay their rent, and they're not thinking about, oh, I have the freedom to travel, I have the freedom, to write a letter to the editor, or I can do whatever. They're just concerned about surviving, and I think a lot more people are concerned about that now than were, decades ago. It's just gotten worse. So I think, people identifying with that, you can only rally people around the troops so much until they realize they're being had, because what are we actually getting out of this?
Yeah, I think you've got the same danger with the fact that Trump got elected. You've got the idea that when people get desperate, right, they look for huge changes that could go in a really great direction or could go in a really bad direction.
I mean, a friend of mine who voted for Obama in 2012, and voted for Trump in 2016, just said, well, I think we need a change. I think, it's kind of a gamble, but we need a change. And I think a lot of people, it wasn't just, skinhead racists who voted for Trump, although some of them did, but a lot of it was just people who said, the system is broken, we need somebody else, we need an outsider to go in and try to fix it. Even if they shake, the words he used were, he's going to shake things up, right?
Right.
So it doesn't matter whether he does the right thing or the wrong thing. The fact that he's going to shake things up. Well, he's going to shake things up, and that's good. And he did shake things up.
But a lot of people would do the same thing going to an extreme left direction, right? I mean, people would be willing to now consider, some real socialist answers to things that they wouldn't have considered before, I think.
Yeah, even I mean, Tulsi showed that even people on the the libertarian bent or the right would be willing to vote for a candidate who supports single payer health care, for instance, if they were going to end the wars,
Yeah.
if they were going to. So it's
Yeah.
kind of like people aren't, you can't just, label people, paint people in red or blue. People are a lot more nuanced about how they feel on different issues. And a lot of times, if you actually sit and talk to people, like Tulsi said, like a lot of times you talk to people, you can find you have areas of agreement with them, even though they might be, they might be pro-life or whatever, and you're pro-choice or whatever. But there's a lot of issues you might agree on, beyond that one issue.
Sure.
Okay.
Did you want to do a conspiracy corner?
Yes. Okay. Yeah, I didn't have a great one, but I made one up this morning.
Nice. There we go.
All right.
All right. We have a theme song now.
Oh, cool.
All
Okay. Is it just for conspiracy corner, or is it for the whole show?
I guess it's for Conspiracy Corner.
Okay.
Yeah. Check the news, the world's insane. We must have someone to blame. It's time for Conspiracy Corner. Put on your tinfoil hat with me. Tell me the latest conspiracy. It's time for Conspiracy Corner. There you go.
Excellent.
Like I say, I didn't have one, so I had to kind of make one up. I don't know. It's plausible, I guess, that I think the VP pick will be Susan Rice. And I think we know, I mean, a lot of folks are thinking behind the scenes, Obama's making a lot of calls. And I think it was pretty much understood that Super Tuesday, it was reported he made a lot of calls to Buttigieg and all these people to get out. We got to go with Biden. We got to, get past Bernie, right? Well, I think what generally happened around the troubles in Libya and Benghazi and everything is when all those riots happened, the administration needed someone to go out and take the heat for that. And Hillary was nowhere to be found. She wasn't going to take do the political suicide of going out and basically lying about a bad video causing the unrest rather than the actual shipping of arms to terrorists in Syria that was actually going on there and everything. But so Susan Rice cut a deal essentially. You're going to have my back at some point. I'm going to go out there and I'm just going to lie. I'm going to do whatever the administration needs. And so now Obama, essentially starting with a call to Amy a couple of nights ago, is making good on that promise.
What was the call? What was the call about?
Well, Amy just dropped out. Amy said we need to have, it has to be, this is also getting at Warren a little bit. Amy dropped out saying he really should pick a black woman vice presidential candidate.
Well, I think that was as a result of all these protests and the fact that, that she didn't, hold the police accountable. I think that really hurt her chances. You could go that way, but in my conspiracy world, what's happening is this is flowing towards Susan Rice. I mean, I think it's kind of amazing she's even being mentioned. Yeah. And I think she's been mentioned for quite a while now to get people prepped that she's in the running. I think it's that could actually happen, that he basically maneuvers behind the scenes. Now, I still are not even sure if Biden will end up being the candidate. Yeah, there's another conspiracy corner thing there. This is if that's the case, then we definitely don't want her because Susan Rice is president. We know it would just be the neoliberal.
Oh, it would be the neoliberal warmonger paradise. Absolutely, yeah. Yeah. I mean, you have to treat every vice presidential candidate. We're not actually in the conspiracy anymore. This is truth. You have to treat every vice presidential candidate as a presidential candidate. I'm not sure that Kamala Harris has a very difficult prosecutorial district attorney background to live down and be in this current culture to be the VP pick.
I think Susan Rice.
My understanding is that Stacey Abrams also was she police or something? I saw something. I thought there was some kind of prosecutorial background or something like that as well. So maybe Susan Rice, I mean, they don't have anything against warmongers, Susan Rice being a pick, I think actually is possible.
I have a feeling the banks would definitely not mind it.
Oh, yeah. Because of the military-industrial complex.
Yeah, because these wars would not exist if it weren't for the banking system the way that it is.
Well, think how perfect it would be if Susan Rice were president for the neoliberals. Because if you attack President Rice, you're anti-woman and you're anti-black, right? And you're like, we work so hard to get a woman of color to be president, and now you're attacking her. So it actually works in their favor. To have somebody who's wearing the right mask, but actually supports their agenda.
Okay, I keep saying, like, to some extent, Trump derangement syndrome is real. I mean, Obama derangement syndrome was real as well, but Trump derangement syndrome is real. I mean, I saw a recent article in the Daily Mail where at one point Biden had said that, yeah, we had cages, but we put kids in cages to protect them.
Right.
Yeah, that's real, Daisy. That's real. We maybe put the link in the bottom,
Yeah.
But I mean, they get away. I mean, and I think I said last week. Imagine how many times a day you would hear it if Trump had said that we could shoot protesters in the leg. I mean, Trump derangement syndrome is real, and other people get a pass.
Well, see, that's one of the arguments that I really liked. How, I don't know if you guys saw that Kim Iverson went on Big Talk, Little Talk. And,
they're working together. Yeah.
Yeah, but she had gone on Big Talk, Little Talk show, and she did like this nice long interview. And one of the things that they talked about was the fact that the problem with Trump still being president this next time around, because obviously the argument is that if you have Biden win, then it's just everyone's just going to go back to sleep. It's going to be like what happened with Obama. The only reason that people care right now is because it's Trump, and everything that he does is put on the on the grand stage, and everything under the microscope, and everybody is watching everything that he does.
Right.
But with that said, also the problem is that Trump, whenever Trump is interjected, it's one of those things where if Trump likes it, then it's bad. And if Trump doesn't like it, or he's not for it, then it's good. And so you can't really have any sort of conversation about anything. You can't really bring about any sort of change because you're too busy just trying to be contradictory to whatever it is that Trump and his people, Trump bad. Everything Trump does is bad, and that's it. And you can't see anything.
Yeah, there is a real problem with the level of insanity of political conversation now because of that, I don't think there would be if Biden got elected, there wouldn't be the same, I don't think, corresponding level of Biden insanity.
Absolutely not.
Yeah. So, I mean, certainly not on the, corporate media side. It would kind of devolve to the same kind of level of stuff with W, right? Where they kind of, didn't really worry about the war stuff so much, but if he said something goofy, that was big news, right?
Yep.
It will be that way with Biden, I would think.
Yep.
Yeah.
How about Daisy? Do you have a legislative week in review?
Yes,
for us?
I do.
Oh yeah.
Okay. All right. So the first thing that I wanted to start off in the legislative week in review is I thought we would do something, a little bit closer to home. And this was really cool. The fact that the Boston City Councilors proposed ordinance to direct nonviolent 911 calls to health outreach workers instead of police.
I just saw something on the shore. Very interesting.
Yeah. And so it says here, so 3 Boston City Councilors are proposing a system to direct nonviolent and non-criminal 911 calls to healthcare professionals and outreach workers instead of local police. It's aimed at replacing law enforcement response for certain emergency calls for service, such as situations involving mental health, substance abuse, and homelessness.
So I love that, especially in the idea of homeless, especially which obviously crosses over into mental health issues. I think a lot of those people probably have a tough time at the hands of police in some situations.
I can give you an actual example. I mean, I live in an apartment building where we have an underground garage, right? And so I was with my daughter, and this was during that really cold spell we had, I think, in December. And we came home and we were about to go into where the elevator is, and there's, we saw a blanket and saw some feet sticking out, and and my daughter was, really upset, and she was like, "We got to call." And my daughter actually has a master's in social. She had MSW from BU, and she was like, "We got to do something about this." So we called 911, and and this police officer showed up from Quincy, Mass, and I have to say he was the most, gentle, easygoing, older officer, and handled it extremely professionally, and was very gentle with this woman who obviously she was older. She was inebriated, and she was asleep, and she felt very embarrassed about that she was in this situation. But he handled it in the right way. But there's nothing there that couldn't have been handled by a social worker.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I was thinking, like, the police are being social workers. That's really a misuse of the police, their authority, and I think, or not their authority, but their talents and their skills. I think it's
Right.
better to utilize like a social worker in that situation. So I have personal experience where I think this would be an excellent alternative to calling the police for every single kind of little thing that comes up, like somebody falls asleep in their car or whatever.
Sure.
And actually, I saw that. I just watched the interview that Jimmy Dore did 3 years ago with Michael Wood, who retired from the Baltimore Police Department, and that's really interesting because basically, like, 97% of your time as police officer, you're just doing stuff like, issuing parking tickets, or people running red lights, or people are drunk, or they're falling asleep, or whatever, and you're not usually dealing with these high charged situations of somebody, with a gun or whatever. It's very relatively rare.
Right.
And I think, why not redirect a lot of these things to the people who can best handle them, and the people who have the training, rather than somebody who's trained, to see situations as being resolved through potentially through a gun, rather than through some, counseling and referrals, right?
Right, exactly. It's this whole notion of, we're constantly talking about it's the lack of training, it's the training, that's the problem. That's why you have all this police violence, and ultimately, if you have people that are trained specifically to heed the call for, like you were saying with the homeless situation, or especially with the issues with mental health. There are a lot of people that suffer from mental health issues, and if you call the police on them, that's a lot of these issues get escalated, because these police officers, they don't know how to deal with these people, and it's not, and to a big extent, it's not anyone's fault, but it's that we're asking too much of these police officers. We're asking them to be a social worker, to be a caretaker, to be a mental health advocate, to be all of these things, but we don't properly train them for that. And so instead, if we already have these other resources, why not use them, right? So it says,
and if you just think of like the attitude, I guess maybe is the right word, of folks that went into policing, and then the attitude of folks that went into social work. I mean, you want those people that they envision themselves helping out somebody that's in distress. And the police, some of them are great people, but that's not what they envision themselves doing. It's just, as you say, I'm just underlining, we can do so much better having the right type of people there, given the care.
Yeah. And it's also a matter of, police will look at someone as a criminal. And these people, they're not committing crimes, they need help. And I think that is the difference, it's the way that these people are viewed.
And how they would analyze a situation. What are the legal infractions happening here? Versus, as we say, a social worker, someone that's gone into that by design, they're going to look at it and say, well, how do we get this person the help they need? It's just so much better. And redirecting funds, obviously, therefore, from the police to a mental health institution would be wonderful.
Exactly. It's just like how we were talking about earlier, that the military, they have their scope, right? They look at people as enemies, right? They're targets. That's what they look at things, and we wouldn't want them policing because they don't do law enforcement, right? It's a different scope that they have, and so it's the same thing with this type of situation where, you know, like again, if we have the resources of people that provide these services, we should be using them. So yeah, so it says
Absolutely.
the ordinance calls for the city to build a plan for the system within 90 days, one that would directly connect callers to city or community-based services, officials say. That includes connecting people in need to healthcare professionals, mental health workers, outreach workers specializing in outreach to residents experiencing homelessness, and other unarmed professionals with specialized training, the statement says.
I'm not
Yeah,
sure
so
how
I
that
thought
would
that that was
actually
really
work.
cool.
How it actually work with a directly connecting callers, because I mean, if you
Yeah.
with somebody who is actually a threatening situation where somebody has a firearm or something, do you want to call them up and say, if this is not a threatening situation, press 1. If it is, press 2, whatever, and have a menu rather than have a live voice answer right away, and maybe have that person connect you with a social worker. So I'm not sure that directly connecting callers. I'm not sure what that actually means, but I would think you'd want to have a live voice live person when you call 911.
Well, I think, yeah, it definitely, if it was some sort of automated system, I don't think that it would be good. But I think that having the 911 operator be able to delegate the calls differently,
Exactly.
right? Instead of just
Right.
directing all the calls to police officers, to also direct them, have those resources to be able to say, okay, this sort of call is, regarding homelessness, so we're gonna go and, pass it along to a social worker or whatever it may be.
Right. They could ask, is this an emergency situation? Right away.
Which, I mean, they already do that. They
already
already
do that,
have
right?
emergency and non-emergency. But I think it's just the fact that, like I said, that 911 operator most likely is going to direct that call to a police officer. And well, now hopefully that'll be different. But I think this is excellent news.
Yeah, that's very very hopeful situation.
Yeah. All right. So then the second thing that I wanted to talk about was this. So it's the S3975, a bill to amend the Consumer Financial Protection Act of 2010 to provide whistleblower incentives and protection. So I thought that this was very weird. Like, do you guys understand from this title what this would be? I mean, the fact that it has whistleblower incentives and protection, that kind of perked my ears up a little bit. I was like, wait a minute, what's this, right? And so I went and I tried to see if there was any sort of legislation already in place, but I was not able to find any text or anything. And I tried to see if I could find maybe the video of it being introduced.
So before you get to the answer or whatever,
yeah.
I mean, my feeling about that would be that if I'm working in a financial institution and I realize they're pulling a Wells Fargo, right, where they're ripping people off, and I notify, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau of that, as a whistleblower, I should have certain protections.
Yeah.
I mean, I assume that's what this is about.
You assume.
Right.
And that's
Yeah,
why I like, I try to keep an open mind about it, right? And so
I mean, as we know, the CARES Act was not about caring about anybody.
Exactly. We live in Orwellian times,
Yeah, the Patriot Act.
Everything is doublespeak here.
Right.
Okay? Exactly. That's exactly why that really, caught my attention. So then I looked at who introduced it, right? And it's Catherine Cortez Masto. And I thought to myself, like, I don't really know anything about her, right? And again, this was just introduced on June 17th. There's no sort of text or anything like that. And as of right now, it's got 7 co-sponsors. Of which include Jeff Merkley, Elizabeth Warren, and Sherrod Brown, right? And so I started looking at, and whenever Elizabeth Warren is into something, I'm always iffy about it. Okay.
Oh yeah.
So I looked at the finances for Catherine Cortez Masto, right? And from 2016 to today, she has raised over $2 million, almost $3 million, right? From him, which I think is a lot of money. I mean,
sure.
I guess, I don't know, in proportion to a Senate race, I'm not sure.
Yeah, we usually only talk about the money, around presidential races, so it gets easy to get confused about the dollar amounts for Congress. I think this is a lot of money for a congressman.
Right.
Congresswoman,
Right.
yeah.
And then I looked at the donors, right? Because I wanted to see where does she get her money from. So you have Emily's list, which is essentially, it's like a pro-choice PAC, essentially.
Whenever I read Emily's list, I see Hillary's list. They're just they have no problems.
Exactly.
They have no problems with the warmongers and the establishment.
Exactly.
They push
Exactly.
it. Yeah.
Exactly. And she sits on some pretty important oh man, I had that up earlier, but she sits on these, like the finance committee. She sits on some pretty important boards, right? And so she gets a lot of money also from the League of Conservation Voters, which I think is really great. But what is she also? She gets a lot of money from J Street PAC. So what is J Street PAC? Right? I know that I've heard this before.
Yeah, J Street. Yeah, J Street's a. I mean, it's a. They're pro-Israel, but they're critical of Netanyahu, right?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So I looked it up, and just by doing like a quick search, it says J Street is a nonprofit liberal advocacy group based in the United States whose stated aim is to promote American leadership to end the Arab-Israeli and Israeli-Palestinian conflicts peacefully and diplomatically. But then if you look at J Street, right, this is jstreet.org, so this is their own thing. It says J Street organizes and mobilizes pro-Israel, pro-peace Americans who want Israel to be secure, democratic, and the national home of the Jewish people.
Interesting. Well, yeah, Wikipedia. I wonder how there's probably a Wikipedia war on that page.
Yeah,
probably.
But that's why I looked up.
Yeah.
I can't actually go on J Street because they want like your information. They want you to like log on or whatever.
Yeah.
So that's why I was like, I'm not going to do that. But the fact that this is such a pro-Israel group, I'm always very weary of these type of groups because they have such an influence on our legislators.
Yeah, I mean, but actually, J Street is a seen as a counterweight to IPAC. So IPAC is very critical of J Street. So it's considered, yes, they're way to the left of IPAC, but they are obviously still in the mainstream, in terms of, U.S.-Israel relations.
Okay.
I mean, I think they advocate a two-state solution, for instance, right? I would guess that J Street advocates a two-state solution.
I know, but it's just like I said, it's just the fact that Israel has so much influence on our Congress already, and they're constantly passing all of these different pieces of legislation that that make boycotting illegal, and like all this stuff like that. I don't know.
But is she unique in that respect, or if you looked at every senator?
No, but that's why I'm saying that's why I was weary about her introducing this piece of legislation. Again, they have no text up, so I can't really I can't make an assumption off of the text because I can't find it. But when I always say follow the money, right? And following the money here, the fact that you have someone, a PAC that is so heavily influenced by Israel, I think that is something to be wary of. That's it.
Yeah,
that's
Israel.
all
I mean, that J Street is not controlled by Israel. I don't think I would go that far to say that. It's American, Israel-friendly people who I think set that up there. I don't think. I mean, obviously, the current Likud government does not support J Street.
Okay.
Just saying.
I mean, I'm not questioning you. I'm just saying that I'm just rationalizing why it is that I might, like the question mark pops up for me when I see stuff like this.
But I mean, this bill is about the Consumer Finance Bureau, right?
Mm-hmm.
But so this is funny. Is like at the high level of this, we have such little trust in our Congress that they're going to name something in a in a devious way that doesn't get to the heart of what they are, and then we're concerned about who's funding them because we know that they could be lying in order to support. So it's just like kind of a wonderful statement on
And this raises the question of
politics.
money in politics. And then, everyone always complains, oh, Congress gave themselves another raise. But like, obviously the solution would be to give people in Congress a salary commensurate with the cost of living in DC. You can't live on $100,000 a year in DC really. And, give them, pay them, even if you pay them, $600,000 a year, like the president or whatever, I mean, that would be way cheaper in terms of what we actually pay, because of the influence of money, and then ban the influence of private money. So people would just get paid a decent salary, and they didn't get necessarily health care for the rest of their lives, but they got paid decently while they were serving. Then at least, and you've really, really banned private money and enforce that. Then I think this makes it clear that we need to go in that direction, but that's a very unpopular political position at this point. No one's going to support saying we should raise members of Congress's salaries, right?
Yeah, definitely not.
But I mean, the reality is, how are you going to live? How are you going to live? I mean, I don't know what a congressperson gets paid $120,000 or something. You can't live on that. Like you can't live on that and fly. I guess you can't. You need to get paid a lot more to run a campaign and to just to survive in DC. So I think this does raise that issue, but it doesn't. What's the answer to that problem?
Well, if other people in DC have to live off of minimum wage, then you know what? Maybe that's what our elected officials should also live at, and then maybe that'll give them incentive to actually raise the minimum wage for people.
Well, I mean, some of them have responded by doing popular fundraising, and obviously, Bernie started that whole thing with the small contributions, and then Tulsi was able to capitalize on that to some extent as well. So, say you're not going to take any corporate or PAC money, but they're definitely a small minority of members of Congress.
Yeah. All right. So then the last thing that I wanted to talk about was the Justice for Breonna Taylor Act, which was introduced by Rand Paul on June 11th. And for whoever doesn't know the story of Breonna Taylor, she was a 26-year-old emergency room technician who was at home after midnight on March 13th when Louisville police entered her apartment unannounced. The police were looking for a suspected drug dealer who was using Taylor's address to receive packages that law enforcement believed contained drugs, which, from what I understand, they already had the suspect in custody.
They had already gotten him. They already picked him up. Right. Yeah.
Even though this says the suspected drug dealer wasn't at Taylor's home, though he was arrested elsewhere later that same day.
Yeah.
But supposedly he was already arrested. Yeah. So they ended up shooting her 8 times.
Yeah. The thing was this. So it's so horrific. They obtained a no-knock warrant, right? So they can just bust down the door and go in. They're plainclothes policemen. Yeah. So how is anyone going to know it's not simply a home invasion? And the police, they've obviously lied about this multiple times. They said, even though they obtained a no-knock warrant, they said they didn't use it. They said they knocked and announced themselves. And other people in the apartments building said, no, we heard nothing like that. We just heard a big crash. So this is a really horrific case. Yeah. Really, there's no way the guy that knew that he was doing anything but protecting them with these people coming, breaking in and not announcing themselves and not appearing as police officers, even that, horrible.
Yeah. Yeah. And so it says the Justice for Breonna Taylor Act would ban no-knock warrants on a nationwide level. It says Florida and Oregon are the only 2 states that ban no-knock warrants statewide, though more are now considering it as the topic has garnered headlines. And also Louisville banned it last week. Remember how I told you guys in the Legislative Week in Review that the City Council had approved that in Louisville and then Houston had approved it last year. And so supporters argue that no-knock warrants are morally wrong by violating privacy, have been too often misused, and have led to innocent people's deaths. And I thought this was really interesting, what Rand Paul said. He said, no one should lose their life in pursuit of a crime without a victim, and no-knock warrants should be forbidden. Let's hope the investigation provides justice. Which, how do you even provide justice for this? Because right now, as of right now, at least last I heard, the police officer, one of the police officers involved in this has been fired, and that's about it.
Well, are they still now? Supposedly, when the guy fired back defensively, her boyfriend or whatever, he hit one officer in the leg, and my understanding is they were bringing him up on charges of like attempted murder. The guy that acted defensively, fired one shot, where they fired a fusillade of bullets that went into several other apartments as well.
Yeah. Which again, it talks about the different justice systems that we have in our country. Why is it that these police officers should be able to act with impunity? Why is it that they can take, first of all, if they wanted to go after the boyfriend, who he was in all his right, he had a permit to carry, he was defending, his
right.
place, especially because, like you were saying, they were plainclothes and they did not announce themselves. I mean, he was in his right, but the fact that that he is not allowed to do these things, but these cops can just do whatever they want, and they murdered this woman. The cop was shot, but they killed this woman.
Oh, they murdered her. Yeah. I do read that they're dropped. The least they can do, they're dropping the charges against the boyfriend.
If they banned no-knock warrants, would they still be required to identify themselves, like with some kind? Because if they're plain clothes, how would you know that they're actually police?
It makes no sense, right? I mean, even if you're wearing a uniform, right, and you bust down a door in a no-knock warrant, I mean, depending on lighting conditions and the person's eyesight and all sorts of things, they may or may not recognize you for being a police officer in time.
But assuming you do have to knock, I mean, would they be required to show some kind of identification or wear a uniform? Because it seems like if they knocked, I mean, anybody could knock on someone's door. If you're going to do a home invasion, let's say you just knock on their door and then you break in after they answer the door. So I mean, how do you know answering the door that it's actually the police? They could say they're the police, but you'd have to have, I mean, I think the issue here is that they're plain clothes as much as the no-knock.
Well, I think it's a whole different ballgame where someone has a minute to process what's happening. There's a possibility that someone's at my door, they say they're police, probably chances are they are police, but then they're aware they have to, take stock of the situation. They would know that somebody's likely coming in with weapons. They were going to announce the purpose of their. I think the no-knock makes a huge difference, because it would mean that you wouldn't know what's coming at you.
I mean, what time of the night did this happen?
It was like 12:30.
It happened right after midnight.
Yeah, 12:30 a.m. Yeah.
So let's say you went to bed at 10 o'clock and you had a couple of glasses of wine or something, and you're just like totally asleep, and someone knocks on your door at 12:30. It's gonna take you a few minutes to kind of wake up and get your bearings, if you do indeed even hear someone knocking on your door.
Right.
I know, like in our apartment, we have a door in our bedroom, so I wouldn't necessarily hear somebody knocking on the door at 12:30 at night if I were sound asleep.
Well, I'm assuming without a no-knock warrant, there would be like not only a knock on the door, an identifying yourself, a giving a warning that you must open or we're going to knock the door down kind of thing. That there has to be certain stages that would go through that a no-knock warrant eliminates at least several of those stages that can help to de-escalate violence on both sides. I just imagine the adrenaline rush in some cops when they know they're busting down a door and jumping in, and they don't know what's going to come at them. I mean,
Right.
it's really for safety on both sides. It's a crazy situation.
I mean, I think it's in the right direction, but I still think it's like, to use the overworked phrase, is nibbling at the edges, because it's what you really need is a kind of total, and not I mean, defund the police kind of captures that, but it's really not about defunding the police, but it's about total reform of the approach. Because I mean, I don't know what the details of this case were in terms of, I mean, obviously this woman was not, she was just an innocent person. I don't know what the deal was with her boyfriend or whatever, but the point is it ended up with, a cop getting shot in the leg, and then this innocent woman getting shot multiple times and killed. That's the issue. And I think, yeah, sure, no knock warrants should be banned. That's fine. It's in the right direction, but it's not about police reform, here and there, and tinkering with a system of policing, but it's about real systemic change. And I think like the Boston reform we just talked about, that's something that to me, that's a real, a sea change in terms of how we've dealt with these problems. And this is important, but it's just one thing.
Well, I actually see like the media working in our favor right now. They're really looking for all these cases of injustice, and they're bringing them to light. And the sum of all these little changes from all these different cases might essentially mean large police reform that we need, right? So the fact this is a wonderful, very hopeful situation, I think, that we actually have everything working in our favor to cause, helpful changes. Okay. So it's really cool. That's definitely, I agree. The one in Boston that Daisy pointed out is really pretty cool,
Yeah. So opponents counter that no-knock warrants should be used sparingly and ideally with no loss of life, ideally, but that they can be a valuable element for police departments. And then, so the odds of this, as this was written on the 17th, there had been no co-sponsors, but as of at least today, there are two, which is Mike Braun and Steve Daines. So yeah, we shall see where this goes. I think it's like what you guys were saying, that at least we're having this conversation. It needs to start somewhere, right? And I think that's what a lot of these things, it like we already saw that again in Florida and in Oregon, they already have it banned statewide, and then now because of this case, Louisville has banned it, and then the fact that you have Houston, so you have all these different places and it needs to start from the bottom, right? It needs to start at a local level. It needs to be something that we bring these up as a conversation, because it's something that people don't think about. No knock warrants, that's not something that is on their list of worries, but the fact that we are talking about this now, I think that's really important, because we do need to be talking about it.
So as we say, it's really good what's happening, this steamrolling of everyone really looking at all these different cases of, typically, black folks being abused by the police. I'm just looking at WCVB, and they're saying just a few days ago that there's basically a bill that would ban the use of chokeholds and no-knock warrants in Massachusetts. So that's great. And local level stuff happening too, right? So that's something to really be positive about,
It's a domino effect, right? That's what we want.
Oh, and my local rep, Karen Spilka, looks like she's involved in that, so that's great.
Well, there you go. Nice.
Yeah.
All right, guys, we're ready to wrap up.
Yes.
So I'm gonna. All right, so we'll see you next week, but hang on after.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Thanks for watching, everyone.
All right.
Peace.
Bye now. Peace out.
All right. Bye-bye.